Okay, today we're going to start talking about the four stages of the business cycle, and we're going to be looking at what are factors that affect the U.S. economy. So our objectives are to identify the factors that influence the business cycle, describe the tools that economists use to predict the business cycle, and then finally determine how the movement and location of resources affect economic growth. So, first of all, we have the four stages of the business cycle. The first stage is expansion, and like it says, this is when our economy is growing. Next, our economy is going to peak, and this is when it is at its strongest. This is when, and I've talked about this before, that the Federal Reserve sees our economy growing and growing and growing, and so they know that eventually this is going to come to a stop, and they want this to happen gradually. So one of the things that the Federal Reserve will do is to raise interest rates. This will allow the economy to slow down gradually. Now, if the economy slows down, but it happens gradually, then it starts to contract, and we know that when something contracts, it gets smaller, and that's the third stage of our business cycle. The businesses start to slow down. And if this happens over a very long period of time, this contraction can actually go from a recession into a depression. And then finally, in the fourth stage, we hit the trough. And this is when demand, production, and employment are at their lowest. And this is when our economy is really going to be struggling. It's not going to start, it's already been there. And so the goal is that when it's at this trough, then hopefully it's going to start to go through an expansion. Now we're going to watch a quick little video of this. Now bear in mind, the lady that's giving this video has quite the southern accent, so she's going to talk like this. Y'all understand what I'm saying, y'all? Okay? So let's just listen to what she has to say. We're not going to watch all of it, but we're going to watch some of it.
Okay, so today I want to talk to you about the four phases of the business cycle, and you can see on the diagram here you have expansion, which is also known as the recovery phase. You have prosperity, recession, and depression. So let's talk
So this is the
about
peak right
expansion or
here,
recovery
and then this
first.
is going to be the trough
This is
down
during
here.
the period that the economy is recovering. There's expansions and there's rise in the economic activities. When demand starts rising and production increases, this causes an increase in investment. There's a steady rise in output, income, employment, prices, and also profits. Businessmen gain confidence.
Okay, so did y'all hear what she was saying when she talked about businesses gaining confidence in the business cycle expanding and peaking and contraction, and then you get that trough? Okay, so those are the four stages of the business cycle. Now we're going to look at what is it that affects or influences the business cycle. And a lot of these things, number one, they're pretty common sense. Number two, we've gone over them to a certain extent, so I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on these. But purchasing new capital goods. Capital goods are things that are going to allow you to make more money. So if you buy if you own a construction company and you buy new tools that are more efficient, allow your workers to get things done more quickly. Let's say, for example, you own a concrete business, and when you pour concrete to get it smooth, a lot of times you have to take something like a 2x4 and you have to get a guy on both ends, and they have to pull it and across, and it takes the concrete and makes it smooth, and it gets rid of all the excess concrete. Well, that's hard, back-breaking manual labor, and it takes a lot of time to do it. However, let's say that you go in and you invest in a machine that can sit on rails, and as the concrete gets poured, a guy just pushes a button, and it just goes right along, and it smooths that out, and you get the job done a lot quicker. And because of that, it's more efficient. You get that job done quicker. Now you can move on to another job. So yeah, it's going to cost you a lot of money up front, but because you're getting jobs done quicker and you're doing more of them, you will actually be able to make more money. So that's purchasing new capital goods. For large companies, they're going to do research and development. And the large companies that we have, the large corporations, they're constantly doing all kinds of research to make their items better. The automobile industry is a terrific example of this. Look at all of the innovations that we have in the auto industry. In fact, now Chevrolet claims to be the first auto manufacturer that you actually can have Wi-Fi in your car. And what they're doing is people are finding out, okay, what is it that the consumer wants? And then they do some research and they look at how practical is that. And if it's something that seems very practical, then they're going to do that. They're going to implement that. Money and credit. More people borrow money when interest rates are low, making more money available for investing. We've talked about this on a number of occasions when we talked about banking, that when you put your money in a bank, someone else is actually going to use it for a loan. And then public opinion, when people feel the economy is good, they spend, and when they think it's bad, they save. Okay, factors that affect the U.S. economy. And we're going to look at what are called leading indicators. Okay, leading indicators are indicators that are going to let the people know, or economists know, what's having a positive impact on our economy. And what they're going to be looking at is, let me get into my word here, leading indicators. And we've had some of these before. They're going to be looking at unemployment rate, business failure rate, tax revenue that's generated, and GDP, or gross domestic product. Okay, next, they're going to be looking at what are called coincident indicators. These show economists how the economy is doing at the present time. Are people making more money than they were before? For example, if we go back to, and I'm going to give you an example of a coincident indicator. Okay, so there's an example of a coincident indicator that, again, at the end of the 1950s, the income of the average family in the U.S. had tripled. So a family that was making $15,000 a year in 1950 was now making $45,000 a year in 1959. That's a huge, huge increase. And at no other time in the history of the U.S. has our economy expanded the way that it did in the 1950s. And then finally, there's what's called a lagging indicator. Lagging indicators, they surface well after an upturn or a downturn has started, and they help determine how long the current phase is going to last. And sometimes it could take several months before businesses really start to get started and they really start to have a positive impact on a local economy, for example. And so lagging indicators do take a little bit of time, but there's our three indicators as to how our economy is doing: a leading indicator, a coincident indicator, and a lagging indicator. Okay, next. Says some American companies will close factories in the U.S. and they will open in foreign countries because those workers will do the same work for a lower wage. And so I'm going to give you an example. There was a company in Norfolk, and they were located right across the street from the Harley Davidson factory, or that Harley Davidson shop that's in Norfolk, and they were called Dale Electronics, and you might know some people that live there. Okay, and so what happens is Dale Electronics, they opened up a factory in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and that is located just across the border from San Antonio, Texas. Because what they discovered is that people in Mexico would do the exact same work for a lower wage, and they were producing the exact same product. And so they could make it there, they could bring it back across the United States, and what happened was that, and I'm going to write this down, put this in here, in the 1990s, NAFTA was created, and NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what this means is that items can be made in Mexico, for example, and then they can come into the United States, and Mexico doesn't have to pay a tariff or a tax on those imported items. And so Dale Electronics, they could make those items in Mexico, they could send them back into the United States. It doesn't cost them any money to do that, and then they go to whatever their destination is. And because employees down in Mexico are working for about a fourth as much, so someone that was making $20 an hour to do at their job for Dale Electronics in Norfolk, Dale Electronics can pay the person in Mexico $5 an hour to do the exact same work. And if you're making $5 American an hour down in Mexico, that is a large, large sum of money. And so they have absolutely no problem finding people to do those jobs. And the people are going to do good work, and they're going to be loyal workers. And so, if you are a business owner, if you own a big business, it makes common sense to do that. But the problem is then you're taking jobs away from American workers, and that really hurts. Some factors affect the economy. These factors cannot be predicted, and it mentions war as an example. World War II, actually, it didn't take us into a depression, but it brought us out of the Great Depression. And so in this case, the war, from an economic perspective, was actually a good thing. Okay, I'm going to stop this here, and then I'm going to continue on, and we're going to get the rest of Section 2 done, and then we're also going to get Section 3 done. Adios.